This is the OverReaction podcast.
Demetri,
Jeremy,
thank you for coming on.
thank you for having me on.
I've wanted you on for a while. I mean, given your background, what you've done, and you put out some good stuff on social media too. So I've definitely wanted you on for a while. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I love watching your episodes too. So good stuff.
Oh, cool. So what are you up to? What's the latest?
It's been an interesting month. At the end of February, I was invited to testify before a Senate subcommittee hearing in the Commerce Subcommittee. Entirely unexpected, but
how did that come about? Did they ever tell you how?
I've been writing about regulation and those topics for a couple of years, and I think it caught a couple senators' eyes, and we had some connections in common, so they were able to put us in touch. So it was a great opportunity.
And how much lead time before? Because it was 4 weeks ago you did the hearing.
It was 8 days. I screened on a Sunday and was invited on a Monday, and I testified the following Tuesday.
Screened.
Yeah, they talk. They make sure that you're not gonna go off the reservation.
Okay.
That kind of stuff. So.
Oh man, and did you? So you were on with Brittany Ing, and then Damian Shelton, and then Mark Murrow. Mark Murrow. Did you guys talk at all before? Was there any kind of connection, or just like, no, you're up and you?
No, I briefly texted with Brittany. We were trying to make it work, but the timings didn't work out for travel. But no, it was the first time I met pretty much everybody there.
Oh wow!
So
how was it? Like, what's kind of the thing? You show up, and what you got? Screening and makeup.
Yeah, there's the screening side, like do you even fit the needs of the committee? And because really, when you're joining as an expert witness, the goal is to gain access to information, particularly in the record, like the federal record, that can be cited at later times. So there's they want to make sure you're credible, that you're not biased in any ways or anything like that. So that initial screening process then connected with many of the different staff offices. So we reached out to the senators that were in this subcommittee to speak and understand where they are. A few of them already had bills that were out there. As an example, so like the Vet AI Acts, and I think there was another one, Rise AI, that had already been proposed, and really connected with the Senate staff office to make sure that you were they wanted to understand how you were coming at this, like what you were thinking. Again, not meant to guide or anything like that, but just to kind of get your take on the space prior to the meeting, so that they know how you're thinking.
Gotcha. Wow. And you were there like total of what, hour and a half or so?
No, 2.5 hours.
2.5 hours.
It didn't feel like it. Like in the room, it felt like it went a lot faster. And there was a little clock, and I was like, wow, it's afternoon. So.
Yeah, I've watched a lot of it. What struck me, and I want to get into some of it. What struck me, it was so different. I remember seeing those kind of disastrous hearings with like Mark Zuckerberg, et cetera, before. And so when you'd posted about it, I'm like, I gotta watch this. So I finally got around to it. I was like ready to cringe a bit, like, oh my gosh, these senators and congressmen are just so ignorant about tech. Like, it's laughable. You think they would have, someone would have prepped them better. But Ted Budd from North Carolina, at least the people that are posing questions seem to have at least done some research. They knew at least to be dangerous.
Oh, absolutely. And that's like, the Commerce, Science and Competition Committee, they are down in the weeds on this kind of stuff. Like the staffers know the space inside and out. It wasn't a healthcare specific subcommittee. So they didn't necessarily know everything about healthcare, but they understood the concerns around replacement. That is a constant dialogue, and not just in healthcare. I know, recently Dr. Katz of New York City Health and Hospitals came out, with the radiology replacement dialogue again. But
I posted about that thing a couple of days ago.
I haven't seen that one yet.
I put that one up, and I had to put the quote from that radiologist. It was boy, he came back pretty hard. But
yeah, well, just like a month and a half ago, there was a CNN story where they literally had breast imaging up as the example for why AI would not be replacing radiologists. And then that was the specific example called out. So it's, kind of an interesting juxtaposition, but it's not just radiology. Radiology is a skilled knowledge worker space, literally
yes,
plus
exactly.
Get there. But, like there's questions about, like in shipyards, with, Brittany and Siemens, is this going to be replacing the workers of the shipyard? And the answer is obviously no. I mean, sure, there's going to be some robotics and things like that help, but there's so much need and, so much area of coverage, like fabric of coverage. We're not yet at the point, and I don't know that we'll be there anytime soon, where we can completely automate those types of procedures.
Yeah, I was kind of reminded of, he brought it up, like Jeffrey Hinton's famous prediction, which, and then there was, I think it was Vinod Khosla as well, or from Khosla Ventures, and obviously with Mitchell, Dr. Kratz as well. But I remember when some of these VCs a couple of years were putting out about, hey, and it's always radiology. I put a post up a couple of days ago. I'm like, how much radiology gets all the punching? Like, it's just constant. It's a constant punching bag. But everybody wants their images. Every doctor wants to see the images of their patients. Every patient wants to see it. And so I put a post up a couple of years ago. Tell me you don't know anything about healthcare without telling me you don't know anything about healthcare, that you'd say something like that. Like, that's like written by a VC. Like, well, yeah, of course. This is like a pitch deck they're trying to use. And they're just so constantly wrong. And it takes me back to kind of this scarcity mindset. And that's what it smacks of. Like, this new thing's going to come out and it's going to completely end this. It's a reduction rather than addition. And the thing I've seen with pretty much any technology that's transformative, it will reduce some things, but it always typically adds and creates more than it actually destroys. And that's the thing that doesn't get talked about. And there's seemed to be, pun intended, back to your days at Nuance, there seems to be no nuance around the discussion.
Yep. I used to joke the devil's in the details, the nuances, but that was when I was there. I loved that joke.
Yeah.
I'm a pun guy.
Yeah, good.
It's fascinating. Like what's happened with radiology. It's viewed as images. And if you think about, Dr. Jeff Hinton's like initial AlexaNet type research, that was image segmentation and classification. That's ultimately what it was. So it's easy to point back at that and say, like, we can do the images so well. But when you think about it, it's not just images. It's multiple series. It's a series that arrives late. It's a reconstruction that you're waiting on. It's like all of these steps that, ultimately come together to make this a thing. And a radiologist can look at a jacket, like where the images are, and say, that's not ready. AI would struggle to do that, because you don't know as AI that the patient is drunk and thrashing around. You can say this isn't a quality study, and then it's gone. But like, that doesn't mean anything. It's like that understanding of overall healthcare is what a radiologist is doing. They're not just looking at images. They're saying this is good enough, this isn't good enough, and not just a quality check, like that gut check as well. They are communicating to the physician. They are effectively communicating to the patient now. Like that's the thing. Like the radiologist report is available within minutes of them hitting sign for the patient. So now a patient that's in the hospital is seeing that they have pneumonia, potentially on my chart. I've literally done that with my son. Like we sent him to imaging. I was refreshing his my chart, saw his results, and like, oh, okay, he has pneumonia. Good to know. Waited another half an hour for the ED doc. It wasn't acute, obviously. But all these different scenarios it's a bundle of tasks. There was a research, I might get the gentleman's name wrong, an economist, from Spain, Luis Garciano, I think is his name. He recently put out a research study, not yet peer reviewed, but talking about the concept of bundling. And it's like, a job is not just one thing. Like, a radiologist job is not just to look at images. It's a whole bunch of different tasks. And the strength of bundling in those tasks is ultimately what determines the strength of the job. And like, we're trying to decompose and reduce radiology down to just images. And that's not at all what it is. Particularly breast. Like breast, they're literally touching the patient. Like they're in there doing the exam sometimes. You might get a tech to do the ultrasound, but like with the diagnostic, you have a radiologist talking to the patient saying, so I saw a mass, we're going to do an ultrasound now, bring the tech in a second, or they might do it themselves. That's a human element. Like that, you can't replace that.
Yeah, Doc, you're right. It's Dr. Luis Garciano. Yeah.
Glad I got my citation right.
Yeah, you got it. Bang on. There's been a couple of interviews even with Jensen Huang from NVIDIA talking about it. He talks about, and he uses radiologists typically mainly because they end up being the punching bag. And it's like, yeah, it's been talked about. What we're seeing is that, the practice of medicine and radiology is part science and part art. The thing that AI can do is help out with the science part, but it can't do anything on the art side. Yep. That nuance, that creativity from hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, and just the collective knowledge and intuition. It's just, how do you quantify that in a series of algorithms? You really can't, at least not right no time soon. So he's talking about it.
Well, if you go back to those Jeff Hinton comments, they were in early November 2016, like 3 weeks before RSNA. One of the, if not the largest, like one of the largest medical conferences focused on radiology. And I remember this because I was there. I was working for Nuance at the time. And radiologists walked up, to me, and they're like, you're doing this AI thing and it's going to put me out of a job. I'm like, no, and honestly, it set back the industry, not, because it makes sense what he said from a technical perspective, perhaps, but not the application perspective. It set back the industry by 5 years. Like when I moved over to Aidoc after, being at Nuance, I had to show up and explain, this is not going to replace you. It's an augmentative technology that holds significant value for you, for the patients, for the institution, and justify because of the perception that it was going to put them out of a job. And then what happened? Residency rates plummeted. If you look at the dip, massive dip. To this day, residency rates are low. Not all the subspecialty fellowships were filled. Like 15% of emergency radiologists or something like that in a recent study slots were filled for fellowship. And we're creating a crisis. Like, we've created a crisis. Like we have fewer radiologists, more imaging volume, more people retiring. And it's largely because of this dialogue that started around it. And now this is where we are.
Yeah, that reminds me of, this is the difference between knowledge and wisdom, right? It's that old saying, like, knowledge is knowing that tomatoes are fruit. Wisdom is knowing it doesn't belong on a pie, right? And so it's the same thing with Dr. Hinton and Dr. Kratz and all these others. Like, a lot, yet wisdom's going to say you're not correct on your assertion.
And I also, I've spent pretty much my entire career aligned with radiologists, like working with them really closely. I've worked across other specialties, but always had a soft spot for radiologists. And like back when I started, the radiologist was still largely in the hospital. Like the full PACS in the early 2000s, it was there, but it hadn't quite taken over to the radiologists now with home workstations and all that. And I remember a meeting with radiologists back in the early 2000s, and they're like, I feel like I've been moved out of the center of the emergency room. And that's where I used to sit, in a dark room, but still in the center. And like, now I'm this abstract person that they just fax, or not fax. I mean, they were using pagers at that point, but page when they need something. I think this is actually an opportunity. So I look at AI as being able to reintroduce the time to have some humanity, not overwhelm radiologists with connecting with other physicians. You don't want to, bog them down that way, but for those really complex cases, reach out and say, hey, I saw this. Can you actually tell me what you're seeing with the patient there in person? Because it didn't quite flow the same way. So it allows them to interact with the patient through the provider that ordered that study in a way that they couldn't in the past. And kind of given a little bit of time back so they can regain that, part of the differential diagnosis.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've got a soft spot for radiologists as well. When I first got into healthcare, it was 2003, and then I joined class. Yeah, and I started the medical imaging division, and then ran all the research teams and stuff for class. And so the thing I noticed, and as I ran the research teams, we talked to people that ran the labs, emergency departments, surgery, didn't matter what it is. And the thing that was so interesting to me is that radiology seemed to be the earliest adopter of tech, the most aggressive seeker and adopter of technology. Like they're kind of the Wild West, the cowboys, where they're just the prospectors, I say maybe is better. They're always looking for something. Like they're the clinical department that seems to push back the least against something new that's coming out, even with some of this stuff. And so they've been automating and trying to automate all the time, and kind of the point of the spear. And so it's not surprising that speech rec, where did it really take off more than any other place? It was right. It was radiology. Where was some of the first use cases of AI? It was radiology. Where's the biggest adoption, the fastest adoption, the broadest adoption is in radiology. So it's like, everyone, can we give them a break? I know that some of them, they roll up in leathers on their Harley and they sit in their $5,000 chair looking at their, I don't know, 20 megapixel monitors or whatever it is. But I mean, they're pretty important.
So people make fun of the dark room and, turn on lights and they scatter, that kind of stuff. Our mutual friend, Josh Strite, actually, he played in, AA baseball, and he talks about pitchers and double, I believe. And the pitcher can see the stitching on the ball when it lands in the glover's mitt from, the mound. They can see that. Their vision is that way. When you think about a radiologist, and there's been studies around this, the average time in which a person can see visual stimuli, it's like 500 milliseconds, so about half a second. For a radiologist, it's like 250 milliseconds. Like they have honed their craft down to be able to literally see these little things that we wouldn't see because it's flicking through the images so quickly. But that's their specialty, and that's the way that they're able to. They're not looking for the normal, or they're not looking for the abnormal. They're actually looking for the normal in most scans. And, it's like normal anatomy, normal appearance and stuff like that. And AI is looking for that abnormal most of the time, which is almost flipping the paradigm on its head. So there's a magic.
That's very complimentary.
Yeah. Yeah. Swiss cheese problem. I mean, it's just like aviation, where, you have ground radar, you have, the airplanes, you have the communication between them. All that comes together to make the, relatively safe aviation industry that we have today. It's the same thing with radiology. Radiologist plus AI. Actually, Dr. Langlatz, within a month of, Dr. Jeff Hinton saying the replacement piece, said radiologists that use AI will replace those that don't. Not, the other way around.
Yes. Yeah. I think I remember the quote from Curtis. So you use the proper doctor. I'm so informal. I remember that quote. I remember when that came out, when and
it was within a month, and now everybody's saying that because the replacement dialogue's starting to hit up. I'm like, well, you owe that trope to him.
100%. Yeah, I love Josh Strait's thing about being able to see the seams in the ball. It reminds me of those. I've seen these videos of NASCAR drivers that drop a ruler and how quickly you can grab it.
Oh yeah.
And the NASCAR drivers are the fastest. I think the only other ones that are faster are as fast as boxers, and they can get it. The rest of us, it's falling all the way down. They can't get it. So radiologists, they get so trained for that. So, since the hearing, have you seen a tone change? What's been the follow-up? What's been the conversations you've had because of that hearing?
I've had a lot more conversations with chief AI officers and CIOs, CDOs, because they're interested. They're what was discussed there, because obviously the posture of our government is going to dictate how things move forward in the future. Pausing for a second. Am I lagging, or is it okay on your side?
No, you're coming through clear.
Good. Sorry. Okay. So the posture of our government's ultimately going to determine what happens going forward. And I think there's also been a lot of questions around state AI regulation, because it's coming up. Like every single state except for like two, I think, proposed a bill last year, and half of them passed one related to AI regulation. So CXOs are trying to get a handle on this so that they're not caught flat-footed, and that's where a lot of the interest in the outreach is coming from. And honestly, from my perspective, I love connecting with them because they're the experts in their state, in their region, in their hospital. So I can get like good diverse opinions of how they're thinking about this. I'm actually going to be giving a governance talk in two different settings next week. One a conference, the Health AI conference in Anaheim, and another one at AWS Gen AI Day at Advocate Health in Winston-Salem.
Oh, nice.
On this topic. So, I mean, interest is high. There's a lot of people that they're planning for the 5 to 10 years, not like even the 5 months to 2 years. Like they're thinking long term on this kind of stuff. And how do we not just do what we've always done with something new? It's how do we transform, literally, and like reinvestigate, relitigate how we've approached this and figure out if there's a new, better, more seamless way to do it, because we have this amazing new power source, and it's an incredible opportunity for that.
Yeah, that's well said. I'm a little concerned with the states doing it without the federal, like to try to comply with. I don't know how you do it. If every state's going to have their own rules, that seems like a lot of friction. Legislation rather than federal.
It's a little technical, but policing powers already exist at the state level, and that's linked back to the 10th Amendment, I believe, which gives the states the rights. Right. Yeah, it gives them the rights to like police and govern certain aspects of it, and they already do it in healthcare. They license physicians. They set the standard of care within the state. They prosecute anybody that goes outside of that. Like all of that is happening at the state level with state laws, with state boards, with state requirements. They are not necessarily globally saying this is what the practice of medicine is, and governing that piece. So like there's no reason it should be any different necessarily when it comes to technology. Like it's the same thing. Like the federal government sets the baseline. This is what you need to consider. Now they need to set that. That needs to be said. But I think what's really important to remember is, particularly at the federal level, we don't need to restart everything. We don't need to put this brand new department out there. That might happen, but we don't have to. If you look at HIPAA, the P does not stand for privacy. It stands for portability. It was an insurance law. Like, and Jeremy, actually, in 2003, that's when the privacy rule went into effect. Here. So like it was about moving your insurance back and forth, and they took that federal framework and said this could also govern our privacy, specifically relating to healthcare here in the United States. And they didn't add a second P. I think that was a miss. But it was a great opportunity to leverage the elastic nature of federal law in particular, to expand it to cover this area that really kicked into high gear in 2003 and then 2009 with high tech, with all the EHR adoption.
That's well said. So what do you think the federal government should do from a regulation perspective? I put out some stuff. I'm concerned. I grew up in Canada, and so I opted out of the Canadian experiment for the U.S. experiment. Mainly because in Canada, a lot of the prevailing thing is government literally should be involved in everything, and pretty in depth. Like it just doesn't matter what it is, it's going to get heavily involved. And so typically when the government gets involved, when I grew up, and it's even more today, they typically go too far. Like there isn't like they don't strike a fine balance. So my concern is that we're going to have another like meaningful use for AI, like we had for EHR, which I don't think meaningful use for EHR mandate was wholly good like a lot of people think. When I was talking to hospitals and clinics back in 2003, they were putting in CDR orders and charting. It wasn't like it wasn't happening. It just, for some reason, it wasn't happening fast enough. And so then it's all right, let's put in the carrot, let's put in the stick. And rather than kind of letting, market dynamics dictate, it kind of came in and it seemed to favor a couple companies a ton, like quite a bit. So my concern is with the government stepping in, they need to step in. I'm not saying they shouldn't, that all of a sudden it's going to favor like hyperscalers or some other really, really big type companies. And it's going to make it much harder for other companies to kind of make it. It could be the regulatory burden could be too much. Again, it could favor, it's that whole regulatory capture kind of discussion that some different investors have talked about before. So I don't know what your take is on that. To me, it's like, here's the principle, here's a basic principle framework, but outside of that, let's not do it. So one of the things I wish that the government do was put like serious teeth around interoperability and any sort of data blocking, et cetera, and fine the living goodness out of any EHR vendors, et cetera, that just truly won't be interoperable. So to me, that's the kind of thing I like, is it, because if you break down those barriers, now you can start having a lot more rapid adoption of digital health and AI without it being highly specific and to a minute level of prescription how that should occur. What's your take on that?
It's kind of funny. Again, I'm a regulation wonk, so
I'll
do the best to stay up here.
Yeah.
You called out effectively 3 laws recently: HIPAA, high-tech, and then the Cures Act, which is where the information blocking piece says. High-tech was highly technical in the defense of the Congress, at the time. The enforcement mechanism they had was reimbursement.
Yep.
Okay. And high-tech is largely targeted towards building a billing system, a mandated billing system that is kind of
masquerading as an EHR.
Yeah. I mean, that's, they're systems of billing that have expanded to systems of care, but fundamentally the billing is the framework upon which they have been built, and that law was
100%.
Because without a new amendment or something like that, you have typically a very limited scope, of what you could do as a federal entity. The Cures Act that added on to, all of that, scope and understanding, because it, created the Office of the National Coordinator and whatnot, prior. The Cures Act was a method that defined information blocking. Like it said, you cannot block information, yet it didn't define the penalties behind it or the clear definition of exactly what it was. So that's where HTI 1 came into play. Again, like these are things that build on each other, but they're all really important, because you couldn't have all this without high tech. So high tech was highly technical. That's actually, I didn't even realize that. That's a good name for it. And Cures was a little more pointed towards the patient, pointed towards the experience, building off of high tech and the scope that was created by high tech. And then HTI 1 actually defined what the penalty was for information blocking. And that it took 6 years to get that, definition. And now finally, I was at an information blocking boot camp last year, put on by Office of the National Coordinator, HHS. But the OCR was there, or I think it was a representative of OCR. And he shared, we're prosecuting this. There are over 1,000 built up in the backlog. We're going through them, and we're identifying which ones we're going to prosecute.
Nice.
And they're able to levy, I think it's like $1 million per instance of information blocking, fines.
That's awesome.
It's significant. And like the beauty of like per instance, it's each time you make the request. If I ask for my records on Monday and I don't get them, and I ask for them again on Wednesday, that's an instance. Those are 2 instances right there. So like the incentive is just open it up and share it. And that's where like I'm also a patient advocate. Like that's, I have a personal health journey and familial ones, but like in 2018, when the Apple Health Kit came out, I signed up the first day it was released.
Wow.
I wanted to see the FHIR interoperability messages. Like I actually wanted to see the code. That's the techie in me, but also as a patient, I wanted to be able to reconcile. I had records at University of Maryland, Maryland primary care physicians, Johns Hopkins. I lived in the Maryland area, obviously. Had all these disparate records, and I, as a patient, wanted a single place to put all of that where I could see it. And there was I can't remember his last name, Anish, the CTO of the United States at the time. Chopra, maybe? Or, I don't know.
I think it was Chopra, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. He was at Healthcare Data Palooza last year, and he was talking about that. That was one of his initiatives. And he shared that Apple effectively forced a common FHIR standard for data exchange across the entire United States with all the sites that connected to that. And for anybody this is techie again, but like anybody that's in the industry, if you've met one HL7 interface, you've met one HL7 interface. Like that's that's the world we live in. So Apple actually is the consumer-facing common standard in healthcare at this point in time because of that early adoption, and we need that a bit more. So like that's getting back to the point. NIST exists, National Institute of Standards and Technology. They have an AI acceleration and innovation center. They're having some listening sessions. I've applied. I don't know if I'm going to be accepted, but I've applied to offer some words for them to listen to. And once NIST puts rules into place, once NIST has a framework, then you can have public-private partnerships that can build on that. So, and I'll go back to HIPAA now. Okay, so HIPAA, I cannot go to the government and get HIPAA certified. So they don't have an entity that gives me like a HIPAA stamp like that. I will be prosecuted if I violate it, potentially, by the Office of Civil Rights. At that point in time. But so how do I prove that I am compliant with HIPAA as a vendor? I go, and since I'm cloud-based, I get something called a SOC 2 Type 2 report. And SOC 2 Type 2 points back to ISO standards as well as NIST standards at this point, because they're reconciled between the two at this point. So like, and by the way, like SOC 2 Type 2 is, I'm going to get the name of the group wrong, but it's like the International or the American Academy of Accountants or something like that. Like it's an accounting standard. It's not a healthcare standard. It's an accounting standard. So, like all this stuff again builds, like, let's not reinvent the wheel. So when I look at regulation, NIST they have an AI risk management framework. Great. Let's put together an AI governance framework. And then you get the certification from whatever third party it is that's out there. There's like, Coalition for Health AI has done some stuff, Health AI Partnership, DIME, like there's a lot of URAC on the, accreditation side. Like there's all these specialty groups that could align with these federal standards and say, Rad AI has done a great job of doing this. So take our word for it, don't take their word for it. And, that is kind of the best world in my mind, where you have like good federal guidance. You have a law in place that says you have to meet these standards that generally aligns with that. And then you get certification, not from the government like you do with high tech, but from, a public entity that's, like Deloitte, McKinsey, one of those types of things. They're doing these assessments.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So part of it is a lot of the right things are in place, but I guess the issues in the execution, the enforcement, and so many, it is iterative and it's not consistent.
Well, there's no clear guideline today when it comes to, like, let's take AI transparency as an example. That HTI 1 update, that built on the Cures Act, it only applied to EMRs because it was built in on the scope of high tech. And then, like, I was working at Aidoc at that point in time, so we were FDA cleared. There was a lot of overlap between the two. So, merged our, FDA summaries that get publicly posted with like a model card type definition. And that was one of the work groups I worked on at the Coalition for Health AI, specifically around that subject, so that when I would get the question from some health system that's trying to adopt AI and not get in trouble, I could say, well, this whole This thing that applies EMR does not apply to us because we're not an EMR, but we already comply with it anyway. So here's our transparency information. Here's our results, and give them a more consistent method of adoption. Now, how exactly we get that scope? Again, this is where I think market pressures are going to determine that more than legislation will. Like, we need good guidance and loose hand framework of like, don't kill people, and you know, here's maybe, I really like the idea of sandboxes. You know, Senator Cruz has a sandbox act that he proposed. You know, much of the state AI regulation has, Senators Utah, Colorado, Texas, others offer sandboxes where you can kind of test things in a known way with like health system and vendor working together to say, we're going to try this out, let patients know, and make sure that it actually works with close monitoring before you just throw it out in the wild. So, things like that. There's a lot of work and I think opportunities there.
That's great. So how did you, tell me your backstory. How did you get into tech? How'd you get into healthcare?
I have a commercial fishing background, and
I'm sorry, what?
My father's a commercial fisherman.
I'm okay. Yeah.
Wow. I grew up in fishing boats, and
dang,
I get seasick. we would go out for 30 days at a time. I would lose every summer I'd lose 40 pounds. I was a chubby kid during the school year. I would lose the weight. Part of my introduction to computers was on the commercial fishing boats, and there was this new thing called GPS that came out, and my dad was running the antennas, and we were wiring them up to computers, and we were tracking our cats, that way. So I actually wasn't going to go to college. I had a good business by the time I was 18 going. My mom found out and said, "You're going to college." I knew I didn't want to work on a boat other than maybe with computers. So I did computer science in college. And while I was in college, my uncle worked at a company called Dictaphone. So he actually introduced me. Yeah.
There you go.
I have
the OG of the OGs.
I have a tape recorder from the 90s with Dictaphone on it.
Wow.
That's so I've known the company. He was on one of the HL7 definition committees back in the 80s. I had HL7 pen when I was a kid. So kind of steeped in it unwittingly. Yeah. And then when I graduated college, there was an opportunity I was pursuing at Cerner. My uncle found out, and he was like, "Hey, talk to Dictaphone." So I got introduced to Gary Pierce at that point in time. I don't know if you ever met him. Wonderful gentleman. He was the manager of sales engineering, and Dictaphone. And my first job was calculating phone ports. I had to run a calculate because 2003, right?
Yeah.
I think it was the Erlang calculation or something like that. I had to put in number of users, concurrent, people, number of patients. And I'd say, okay, you need 48 ports. So we drop off a box with a 48 port, fax in it so that they could plug all the phone lines in. And then also because I started the same month HIPAA was being enforced, my Gary Pierce printed out HIPAA for me and handed it to me and said, "Read this." And I, not a lawyer, but technical. And the lawyers were like,
and after you read it, you're like, "Why do you hate me?"
Well, I've read every regulation since then. I think I'm one of the few people that's ran high tech and cares. I didn't read HTI 5. There's a joke that was going around LinkedIn this past year because they put out HTI 5 on December, it was I think 23rd or 24th, and they were calling it the Office of No Christmas instead of ONC.
That's classic.
Yeah, so that's how I got the entry point. I was tech. I did the sales engineering stuff. I like to talk. I like to present. I was doing a lot of the demos. I did the security certification with the Air Force at Nuance, and that was fun. I got to edit registries, go to the national data centers and do the testing, and just loved it. And then I went into the sales side from there, and eventually over to Aidoc, and Aidoc. AI we were still justifying the existence of AI because of those, early quotes. So we kind of put in the yeoman's work to build the industry, which I think has paid off now for a lot of those early innovators, Aidoc in particular. And, then as Aidoc is now in like strict execution mode, I was like, Rad AI was a little, earlier than Aidoc and was growing quickly. And it was a chance to go back to the, world that I came from, literally the I saw speech recognition in radiology go from like 10% to 85% in my 95% of my time there. But 85% PowerScribe market share, during its heyday. And I was like, well, now we can go in and go from speech recognition, which literally old speech recognition was mouth sound based. It wasn't word based. Like it was actually listening to the phonemes that you were saying. And it was doing statistical modeling of phonemes, not words, to this modern AI based, which understands the words, understands the context, and can use AI to actually enable not just the mouth sounds, but the entire full spectrum engagement with the radiology report. So and along the way, I had my own personal health stuff. My mother passed away in 2013 from a curable form of cancer. And the month she passed away, she had been diagnosed 5 years earlier, treated 5 years earlier. The month she passed away, we got her "You're cured" letter, in the mail. So, those types of things. Around that same time, I had coming closer to my diagnosis. I had had like random numbness for like a decade, transient, and went to see a PCP, and he's like, maybe it's a pinched nerve, and it turns out it was multiple sclerosis.
Wow.
Yeah, very benign. Like I've been lucky. You never know it's a wildfire. I've been lucky that it's really never progressed since then. And then my wife actually just went through her own relatively delayed diagnosis for cancer, and big treatment journey. She's doing well now. No evidence of disease on any scans.
Oh, good.
That's one thing I emphasize in my testimony. Every single one of us will be a patient or a caregiver or both. And you got to be ready for that, and that's where healthcare is different.
Yeah, that's I've unfortunately made a lot of trips to urgent care and ERs, but all by choice. So I remember it's kind of interesting how disconnected things are. Like, so I do everything I can. I'm like the worst patient you could ever imagine, because I'll literally do anything to avoid going to the doctor, like literally anything. Like
I think I can one up you.
You might be able to, but I'll go to people and say, stitch me up. Like if someone knows how to do stitches, like I'm not going in, try to stitch me up or take out my stitches or whatever. So the one time I couldn't, like there was no way I couldn't. I broke like 10 ribs in my shoulder blade, my lung, and collapse and all this other kind of stuff. So there's just like no way. Like I got to go see what. So I got drugged into the trauma ward at Park City Medical Center just up here. And it was just nuts. Like I was there like 5.5 hours, and and if I'd have paid more attention, I'd have said, you know what, I need a CT with contrast. Quit putting me in front of these X-ray machines. Like I walked out of there, I should have been like Homer Simpson, like glowing. They went through, it was an X-ray and stand and lay down and then out, and then it was a CT, and then it was like get another X-ray, and then like, oh, we better get some. Can't really see what's going on. There's so much, everything's so busted. Let's get contrast. And at that point, I'm like, guys, I'm in the space. Like this is crazy. And then they kept trying to push like narcotics on me. And I've had friends get addicted and die. And I'm like, hey, I have a really, really high pain tolerance. I've been here 4 hours. I've been screaming at you. Just give me some ibuprofen. And they came back to meet you 3 times. He's like, no, you need to take Percocet or something, or Demerol. I can't even remember. And I remember looking at the lady last time, the nurse, or maybe it was the doctor. I'm like, why are you pushing this? I'm lucid. Yep. I've 3 times now. I've told you stop. I've friends that have died from this. I'll be okay. I've been compliant with everything you've talked about. And then finally, they still wouldn't give me ibuprofen. So we won't give it to you until we release discharge. And I just remember going like,
wow.
So I'm all I'm all about AI. I'm 100%. If it can help people, nurses, doctors, whatever, other care workers do better.
Well, so what I say, like, it's important to, I'm all about AI, obviously, too. I've worked at multiple companies with AI in their name. But you have to use it in the right way with the right engagement, the right understanding. I've had
a different kind of 5 rights, right?
Yeah. I mean, I've had the unfortunate learnings from multiple ICU stays, none of mine, like, but family ICUs. And like, when I have any family member in the ICU, I'm there with a book, or one of our friends is there with a book, literally writing down like every single thing that happened in terms of like medication administration or any of that kind of stuff.
Smart.
Because of the systems. And I was, during one of these stays, I was there, and narcotics, it was a major surgery, so like narcotics were needed, and it had been 4 hours since they were administered. It was on an 8-hour schedule, and they were trying to give them, and I stopped them, and I was like, it's been 4 hours. And they said, yeah, but the EMR tells us to administer the medication. Like, I get it, but like, can you check? I think that's I've been around healthcare enough. I was like Q8, and I guess that's no longer in vogue, but like, every 8-hour administration, cycle. And I was like, can you check? And they're like, yeah, it's 8 hours. We're allowed to do 2 hours before or 2 hours after. I'm like, great. It's 4 hours before. Like, yeah, but the system says to give it. I was like, call the pharmacy. Please have them retime the medication, because it's obvious that there are like multiple orders in there. And I was like literally explaining the systems, and well-meaning nurse, she was busy. Like, this isn't to dump on anybody, but like, this is where the human element comes into play, because AI wasn't used there. I think this one was just literally ordering and timing, but there's variability in AI and different things like that. So like, going back to this radiologist replacement dialogue, they're literally the people that bring light to dark. They sit in a dark room, they look at bright images that's light. And they, Heather Smeal, our VP marketing. Yeah, she's
I'm talking to her next week. That'll be great.
Awesome. Yeah. So, I mean, like, they're the ones that are taking these dark images and saying, this is what I see. This is the impact of the patient. This is, what's going on. And they are that human element that is working with the technology and, driving the outcome that's there. And it's easy to forget that, with somebody that's off in that dark room, but like, they are humans, and they're dealing with cognitive load of their own. They're dealing with stress. They're dealing with all the volume, the residency challenges, all that kind of stuff. So I'd ask that we be kind to them. Like, they're critical. They're vital.
I'm kind to them, but if I walked out with an addiction and ruined my life, I don't really care about being kind. So there's an interesting quote. Someone says, kindness to criminals, and I know they're not criminals, is punishing everybody else. So I agree with you. There's that the error is human and that kind of thing, but it just takes once. I had a good friend I worked with, one of my first job at a university, and this guy disappeared on a weekend and didn't come in on Monday. And then he shows up later in the week, and I'm like, D, what happened? He's like, I've been trying to hide it. He goes, I'm a heroin addict. I'm like, what? And I'd had friends, like most of my friends grew up smoking pot and that kind of stuff. And so I had a little different opinion on legalization, because all my friends that smoked pot all ended up in prison, all ended up whatever. Like, marijuana when you're a teenager is not a really good thing for the brain. It just isn't. So he tells the story about, hey, I was growing up, and, I was kind of a wild kid, and I drank alcohol. Nothing ever happened. And I, smoked pot. Nothing ever happened. I even did cocaine a couple times. He's just going through, and I'm like, holy flip, dude, you're crazy. And he's like, then I tried heroin for the first time. And the second it hit my system, I knew, and it was weird. I had this euphoria, but in the back of my brain, I'm like, my life's over. My life is over. And so he said, I don't even know how it happens. Like, I have no memory. I'll just wake up in an alley somewhere. I'll be good for 6 months. And he goes, and that's the whole thing, is I'm an addict. I'll never not be an addict. And so that just hit. And then I've had friends will go through and they get addicted to pain meds, et cetera, and friends that were football players, et cetera. So part of it to me was, yes, absolutely be nice. But I'm like, if the patient's like, stop this, can you please stop doing this? That's where I'm like, let's kind of listen. I don't know if the AI can't help with it. And everybody has their best intention. So I agree with you. Be nice, be kind at the same standpoint. But what you're doing is you're advocating. Like if you had to get mean, you would, because at the end of the day, your family member, and you're like, that's not right. So I'm being nice.
Oh, I did in that scenario. I was very direct. I literally
which is not mean. I guess today that's mean. Where we were growing up, that wasn't mean. That was just called being direct. So
well, I mean, so what I think is fascinating about like opiates, there is a time and a place. Like there are certain scenarios where you have
absolutely.
But early on, I think there was incentives to administer in situations where it didn't make sense. Now there's almost the disincentive, which can be just as harming in some situations, like
absolutely,
and things like that. So again, this is where the human element of discretion and understanding that cannot be performed by AI. It just can't at this point in time. And we need to remember that that's at the heart of medicine, and enable that to, like there's so many top-down mandates there. And the other piece that I would call out, if we go back to those state AI laws, there's some proposals that are paternalistic in the extreme, and the past 2 decades have been trying to break down paternalism in medicine.
That's happening in my state.
Where do you live?
Utah.
Oh, okay. Well, so Utah did a sandbox. Like
Utah did a sandbox, but they're the ones that are trying to outlaw any social media for kids. So I agree in principle. I agree that social media, as you've seen, I'm sure the studies as well, that young kids, when they get exposed to screens and they're on, early, especially when they're like 2 or 3, it actually is lowering IQ. Like it's a terrifying thing, like or to say that the formation of white matter is actually less, like noticeably less in MRI scans. That's pretty scary stuff, right? So I have this thing of, yes, social media should be very limited for kids because it's not good. And you can, in public schools, you can absolutely say no smartphones, right? There's certain things, but to come out right off the bat and say, my opinion, I'm more of a libertarian, that no, that by force of government, it is now illegal. You cannot, no kid under 18 can have any social media. And then, a lady just won a big, which opens Pandora's box against Facebook, $1 million lawsuit that she's addicted to Facebook. So and that's so hard to prove, because with physical, tangible things, you're like, they're addicted. You can actually see the physiological response. Social media, it's hard. So that's where I'm kind of on your side on that, probably even more extreme though. I'm very concerned about the paternalistic nature that's happening in some states with their legislation.
Well, like there's one that has if you're not a licensed professional, then you're not allowed to receive anything that is health related or legal related, because the AI is doing the job of individuals. And I'm not going to call out which state, but it's it's things like that I'm, again, a patient advocate. I don't personally use AI much for that side. I did recently use AI to figure out which insurance I should go with, and I figured out a loophole that actually made the high deductible health plan a better bet, despite the fact that, again, I have MS. I knew I had to get, it was about $90,000 worth of imaging in January. Literally. It's insane. And my wife has to get like all the blood tests and all the treatments to go along with that, and things like that. Yet it still made sense because the copay was $0 after you hit your out of pocket. Literally $0. And everything else, my copay was going to be more than my deductible, even with the more expensive premiums. So I was like, I had to use AI to double check that I wasn't just losing my mind when I looked at the thing. So I put in like 90 pages of documentation into ChatGPT and had to break it down. I was like, no, you're right, and you found a great loophole. So
I think AI is brilliant. Like I use it as my background's economics and research and stats, et cetera. It's the best assistant intern I've ever hired.
Yep.
Hands down. And I think for
like an intern like that's
well, but I have to check the work of an intern anyway. So I just use other AI to chat. But because I have such subject matter expertise in the things I'm researching, I can catch when it's being dumb or when it's hallucinating. So it accelerates it. And I think the same thing's going to happen across the medical field, where AI is going to evolve to be not take over, but to be the best medical assistants that have ever been around. I'm so bullish on it.
Completely agree. Same.
Well, is there any? I know we're out of time. Like there's so many other questions I was going to ask, but it just flew by. Like your testimony, like 2.5 hours. The hour just flew by. But really quickly, is there anything we should have covered, but we just didn't cover that you think we should end with?
So again, thinking about AI, and I'll bring it back to radiology specifically, but this applies to any clinical specialty. There is so much information out there. There's research happening at a pace that's never happened before. Some of it because of AI, also just the historical build. So how we use AI to augment the physician, to integrate into their workflow, to deliver all this cutting edge information from trusted sources will ultimately determine success, because that is what will change the paradigms of care. What will change the standard of care. At Rad AI specifically, we've partnered with RSNA Ventures, and we are putting the highest impact.
That's right. That's right. That was such a cool thing that came out a while back. Yeah.
We're like putting that right in the point of care for the radiologist, so that when they are like, I think I see a liver lesion, let me pull up the journal. And it's not just a journal that's like the scientific read, it's the making it actionable, making that part of the ability to integrate it into the report and have it cited for the ordering physician, and different things like that. So I think the ability to integrate AI plus trust is what is ultimately going to take us to that next phase of adoption. And let's stop the replacement talk. We'll figure out incentives and all that later on. And let's instead look at how do we make all this better and more effective, and build trust with physicians, build trust with patients, throughout all this. So I think there's a bright future. We just got to kind of get out of our own way to let it happen.
That's a perfect capstone. Awesome. Well, Demetri, thanks so much for coming on. Everybody that's watching, I'm going to put a link. You can see Demetri's LinkedIn profile. You can see it to Rad AI as well. Encourage you to go follow. Demetri puts out some fantastic stuff, so please follow him. And anyway, again, Demetri, I really appreciate it. This was fantastic.
Same, Jeremy. Pleasure.